join us tonight for this program on the history of the Portland Women's Movement. It's a project of the history of social justice organizing, and we're co-sponsored tonight by the Sociology Department, as we have been for a few months. But tonight, we have three wonderful activist Portland women. Well, actually, Maureen is no longer a Portlander, but she was at the time. Maureen is now an artist and a writer and a web publisher. But at the time that she's going to be talking about tonight, she was a student at Portland State, very active at Portland State, and very in student government as well as in the women's movement on campus and the women's movement in the city. And I'm going to let her go into more detail about that. Maureen is in the center. On the far end, we have Kathleen Saadat, who's been an activist also from the 70s. She's worked with several women's groups, among them the Black Women's Rap Group, Las Mujeres de Colores de Oregon, Radical Women, Black Lesbians and Gays United. She also is a part of the group who responded to the government's attack on the Fred Hampton Clinic. And she's done a tremendous amount, has remained an activist for many, many years, and just retired, and almost, I believe, the same day she retired, she made her debut at the Schnitz as a singer with Pink Martini, which was quite thrilling to be surprised by that. Susan Stoner on this end is a local union attorney, and she also writes wonderful historic mysteries with a political bent. They're great. She was involved in the early 70s in Witches, which was the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. She also was involved in starting a women's health clinic, Health Wrap. She was involved in Outside In and a whole lot of activist projects. I'm going to let them tell you the details. They're each going to talk for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll kind of open it up to everybody to talk. So I think I'm going to call on Susan first, and maybe we'll just move down the table.
She said I have to talk for 12 minutes, so.
Okay, I'll start timing.
Well, when I was thinking about coming here, I was thinking, and I'm not sure, we didn't really get a chance to talk, but I would pretty much have to say that had it not been for being a hippie for a couple years, and had it not been from a mother who didn't recognize any sort of limitations on herself as a female, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. And so I kind of went from being a hippie into getting involved in the anti-war movement, and got involved in a lot of interesting and fun things. And one of them was the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. And I guess I'm supposed to tell stories, so what we did, we only did two things, but they were fun, and they were sort of on the idea of the yippies, sort of a sense of humor and a little bit of color and excitement. And the first thing that we did was, Pat Nixon was famous for her beautiful highway program, and she was touring the country saying everybody needs to pick up the garbage by the highway. And so we dressed up as witches, and she was at what was at the time called Centenary Wilbur Church over on the east side. And we were in a house like a block away, and anyway, somehow the Secret Service was focused on this press conference that was happening in the basement. And so we went in, we had a little anti-war chant. So we started chanting, and that stopped everything, but we were behind a big room of people. And there was a little witch next to me, and I picked her up and held her up. And one of the daughters, Julie, screamed at the top of her lungs, and the room exploded. And then we ran like hell, because we didn't know if we were going to get shot or not. So we got chastised for being rude and impolite to the president's wife, but it was a fun thing. And that was just a group of women who were involved in other things, but the Witches was one place where women could actually get together and do something as women. And so that was fun. And then the other thing that we did, which actually I kind of liked even more, was we were in the Rose Parade, uninvited. Some of us dressed as royal Rosarians, and some of us as princesses, and the princesses had dog collars on and leashes. And we went ahead of the parade, and we were making a comment about, of course, how women were objectified and things like that. So that was kind of the fun stuff. When I later got involved with John Moscow, who helped start the Fred Hampton Clinic, we did health wrap, and a lot of things that I did did affect women and families. I guess it's always been my bent. And what we were trying to do there is, at the time, and I should say most of the people involved in that were women, except for John. But what we were trying to do was, at the time, if you were sick, there was only one place you could go for medical care, and that was up on the hill, OSHU. And you couldn't go to Good Samaritan, you couldn't go any place like that. So we started attending like the Good Samaritan board meetings and the medical society meetings, and we'd have our little placards and we'd have our statistics, because it wasn't a good place to get health care up there, and if you were going to the clinic there, you waited for hours and hours in order to get in. And at one point, I got to go as a clown, and we did a little puppet show for the people and the kids who were sitting in those chairs. It was, plastic chairs, and you sat there for 3 hours to get seen. It was really bad. And so that was a lot of fun, and it actually did change how healthcare was delivered, so they couldn't turn you away from Good Sam and send you, say, no, we don't treat poor people here. They actually started to have to take people who needed emergency care. So it was a good thing. And let's see, what else? Well, I got very involved in the neighborhood movement, and that was in the Corbett Twilder Lair Hill area. And we ended up being sort of running the neighborhood house, and as a consequence there was space there. And the first thing, I got a little corner room, and we started a women's health clinic. It was like an extension of Planned Parenthood, only in the Southwest, and got volunteer doctors, and that was a good thing. And then after that we did lead paint testing in the neighborhood for the children. And then after that, I got involved with prisoners advocacy, and we worked with Red Cross and got transportation down to the prison. And I think that is still going, maybe through, last I heard, through the Salvation Army. And that, of course, was a lot of women and children, and that was a good thing too. That felt good. There's just, things would rise and fall and stuff like that. So. Now I'm fighting TriMet and still working for families. The job that I have is basically workers' rights, but that always kind of boils down to money and whether they have a living wage and benefits or not. And it's real satisfying. It's stressful, but it's kind of all of a piece of what I've done my whole life, which is sort of advocate for economic justice and social justice. And it's satisfying. So I urge all of you who have a bent in that direction to follow it. That's all.
Well, I find it interesting how our different lives and perspectives, our different places where we are sort of intersecting, overlapping, changing the kaleidoscope, the picture. Because, there's a lot of points of intersection there. Besides all the Portland state and community things, I was very moved by John Moscow's this effort to organize a community around health issues also. And I remember some of the early meetings to get a women's house and women's health clinic together, which was very necessary. And, you know, so many people were out of the system. Insurance doesn't have quite the stranglehold it does now on healthcare, but there was still a great lack, especially for younger, poorer people. And he, I remember, did a wonderful rally at Good Samaritan. And that was maybe the first time in the country where there was a declaration of, by all the people that attended, of this concept of every person has the right to health care. You have a right to health care. It's not a privilege. It's a basic human right. And of course, we're still working on that. I had speaking of privilege, had the privilege of being involved in a fundraiser for the new Fred Hampton Clinic, which was getting invitational cocktail party, shaking hands with our Pete Seeger, who came to give a concert. And so I organized this fundraiser after the concert event. And I was so busy serving drinks and washing dishes, I never really got to talk to him myself at all. But years later, the Portland Tribune did an expose that included thousands of files.
Red files.
The red files of the Portland Police Department. And this one zealot was supposed to, after being in charge of this for years, was supposed to destroy the files. And he didn't. He stored them in his garage. And when he died, they found all these files. And among other things, there was one on me and, you know, the involvement with the Rose parade and what were these women going to do. They were really, really worried. and they had this one phrase that I'll never forget about how we must have organized this concert by the so-called folk singer, Pete Seeger. So-called folk singer. It's really pretty funny. But it gives you sort of an idea of where they were coming from, which was a real limited perspective. But I'd gotten to Portland State, basically sort of a personal journey, realizing if I didn't do something constructive, like go to school, I could end up on the streets, you know, not a real pleasant perspective or future. And so I took a test. What was it? The general equivalency test. And got into Portland State. And I'd been interested in anthropology, took lots of anthropology courses. And just sort of saw the whole world as anthropology. So it was all this grand experiment. And got involved in student activities. Actually never student government, but student activities. And became...
Joe Uris?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And actually, by the time I came along, he was more the grand man of the student movement. I think he was doing some instructing at that point. And we put together a speakers program, which I hope somebody still has some of the information. I eventually divested myself of all the programs and posters and everything because I thought, I can't continue to be an archivist for the movement, you know, going up and down the coast all the time. At that time, that was true. And there's some remarkable programs. We brought Kathleen Goff-Aberle through the speakers program, and William Appleman Williams, and Gabriel Coco, all sorts of people. And the art students who ran this silkscreen shop, I forget, the poster shop, they just called it. They did some remarkable, beautiful work. And I don't know if anybody has any of those, or if they're in any archive of the university here, but it would be worthwhile. And then the audiovisual department did a lot of taping of the various programs and shows, and that would be some worthwhile material there. Another thing we did was confront military recruiters, and we worked out a deal with them and the administration that if they came to give military recruitment, that the anti-war, pro-peace position would have equal time. So there evolved a series, actually a very wonderful series, well-attended, of open debates. And of course they sent their brightest young lieutenant who did this pretty, solid defense of war. If you could do that, he did it. And so it was a pretty lively time. And they usually happened around noontime, so people would gravitate to it. And eventually, one time or two, they decided not to do that. And so a group of us decided to ask the military recruiters to leave if they weren't willing to do public debate as our agreement. And we escorted them off the campus in this building, one of these rooms here, escorted them, and no violence, nothing nasty, maybe a little rude, but we figured they had broken the agreement, so it was until they were ready to do public debate, they should leave. And that earned myself and some other people a nice suspension, an indefinite suspension. And I felt, well, my little academic career is over forever. So I went and did other things, and then eventually realized I could maybe go back to school and finish up, which I did at Berkeley. But in the meantime, I went and got involved in a group in the Bay Area called Women in Apprenticeship. And we acted as what we called gatebusters to open up unions to minorities, including the women. And so I belonged to several unions over a course of years and got some skills. And I kept thinking, oh, well, this will be good for my art too, I'll learn a lot. But the fact is that when you come home after a long day laboring, you're really not ready to make the great sculpture that will be here at Portland State. But there's so many things we could talk about. It's really, oh, here's something I've been thinking of. One of the things we wanted to do was try to figure out how do you involve a particular community in a project that is meaningful to people's lives, just not abstract. But how do you make reform real? And unfortunately, often reform and revolution become the same thing. In order to push a meaningful social change, you have to upset the apple cart and make apple pie. And one of the needs that we saw was for daycare. And Betty Chaucy and I were the founding members of a group we called WOMB, Women University Members. And it was theoretically open to students, staff, and faculty, and to work on particular issues that were of significance to women because of the problems of how do you make a living wage if you're paying 60% on childcare. It just doesn't work. How do you use the talent that's in this pool of a school and, the different departments, sociology, anthropology, psychology. How do you use those professors and the students to do a project that has actual meaning? That would be a meaningful, internship and that sort of thing. How do you integrate those ideas? So we decided to make childcare our major priority. And now, of course, the Portland State Daycare Center is just a taken, people have a hard time imagining what it was like before that existed. But I have a secret theory of why I and some other people were suspended. We did a baby in the president's office. Gregory Wolfe came in one day to work to find that we had taken over his office. And in fact, I was changing a baby on his desk. It wasn't planned. I mean, I didn't say to this baby, now listen, you have 5 minutes to produce a good product, make it really fragrant. And it just happened. And so I don't think he quite forgave me for changing that baby there, but there was no other easy place. So anyway, we did this baby in, and then later, you remember, at that point I wasn't a student, so I couldn't attend, but there was the faculty party at his house, at the President Wolf's house.
I'll talk about it.
You'll talk about that,
Yeah,
that's
I'll
really
talk
funny.
about it.
But between the demonstrations, which gave attention and we hoped a certain humor to the issue, and we did our homework too. I went to various people on the faculty who were sympathetic and got their support, and also asked them to help me recruit people on the in the administration who could help facilitate such a thing. And we had a daycare task force, and we eventually came up with a report and projected, what it would take to develop a pilot program, a budget, this sort of thing, and got a grant and hired Michelle Carlson Alexander and as our point person to actually develop the physical entity that people could come and bring their children within a year. We had a year as a reasonable amount of time to get the various talent personnel together, director, equipment, find out all the health regulations and have them actually done. So many vents, and they didn't have disposable diapers then, and so the health regulations were rather strict, and they should have been. And the first place that we operated, where we had the pilot project set up, was in the basement of this building. But we figured eventually it would get better, and it did. And I am so happy for that. But it's how I think we see a need and try to bring the ideas to reality that make movements. And for the Occupy movement, I think there's some very exciting and wonderful things going on there, but there are also some problematic things. Unfortunately, some Occupies in various cities did not make a commitment to nonviolence, for instance, and that's caused major problems. And so I guess that would be one of the things I'd want to talk about too, is in the quest for social change, why it's important to keep that as one of the unifying principles, and to be careful of who you ally with. If you are making an alliance with someone who has a completely different agenda and sees violence as a justifiable tool, you've got a problem. And it's interesting how this has been one of the themes, I guess, all through the decades of social change in this country and other countries. So I will leave you with that thought for now.
Hi. I came to Portland in 1970 from St. Louis, Missouri, and having graduated from high school in Chicago, and gone to college for a year and a half, and back to St. Louis, and then I ran away from home at 30 years old and came to Portland. And had culture shock for the next 15 years. Finished college here, where I was radicalized. There were some very wealthy, very intelligent, very competent people who knew nothing about the world that I knew, the world I lived in. And I lived in worlds where there were lots of lesbians, lots of black folks, lots of women, lots of poor people, all of which is part of me, and I consider it indivisible. I was sitting there thinking about this, and I just decided to dump out on a piece of paper the kinds of things that I had touched or had touched me during the 70s, things I'd been involved in. Mountain Moving Cafe, Feminist Credit Union, Community Law Project, Take Back the Night Marches, Dyke Tones, Mercy, which was a cool jazz band. They were just hot. Black Lesbians and Gays United, Mujeres de Colores de Oregon, Black Women's Rap Group, Radical Activists for Sexual Minorities, Radical Women, Freedom Socialist Party, International Women's Day celebration. I want to say a little bit about that. We used to take over the YWCA in this city from top to bottom. We'd go in the night before International Women's Day, rearrange all of the furniture. We had music, poetry, food, plays, anything you could think of. People sold goods, and you could barely get through the building. There were so many women. And it was probably the most culturally diverse event in this city. And that happened for years, and then all of a sudden it got moved, and it changed its character. It doesn't happen that way anymore. The Fred Hampton Clinic, I was part of the defense team when Lynn Parkinson was acting as their lawyer. I was on the board of Bradley Anglehouse, the first one, working with Bonnie Tinker. Interacted with the Women's Place Bookstore, Portland Women's Counseling Collective, Lesbian Community Project. When Kathy Siemens started to pull that together, she did a survey of the community, talked to people all over the city about what they'd like to see in that project, and she started that institution, which is now defunct. The Portland Lesbian Choir was another thing that was happening here. The Rape Relief Hotline, Melanie K. Kantrowitz was a part of that. Lucia Pena was doing a lot of the training, cross-cultural training for the people who worked the hotline. Melanie also ran the Lavinia Press, which was located on the 3rd floor of the Women's Building over on Everett Street, right up there like 20th or something like that. It was hot up there in the summertime. Oh, a lot of this was paid for by CETA funds, incidentally. That's government funds. And some of the legislators were complaining that we were financing our own revolution. Sliding scale was popular. For events, for services, you pay what you could. Women's land was an issue. Lots of people, lots of women wanted to own land and share it, live cooperatively. And gay pride became lesbian and gay pride during that time. I felt and still feel that all issues are relevant. As a woman, there's not much that doesn't touch me. Talk about justice systems, economic, you want to talk any of it, religion, all of the institutions that make up a society have an effect on me. And so I've kind of been spread all over the place in what I've done, the kinds of things that I've done, because I felt like each is important. But focus a lot on gender, sexual orientation, and race. But I also made the peace marches until I think the last one I was on, we had to stop and kneel down in the middle of the bridge. My problem wasn't kneeling down, it was getting up. Women's studies, black studies were big things here at the university. There were lots of fights in the women's studies program about, there were power struggles going on. all the time. The sense was a hopefulness, a commitment, a determination. We can do it, we can do it, we can make a difference. And you said Centenary Wilbur Church, and it just flashed on me how busy that huge church over at 7th and about Sandy somewhere in there. There's a huge church over there.
Ankeny, yeah.
That whole building was full of activist organizations. I can't remember the paper. There was
Portland Scribe.
the Scribe, okay. That was
The GI
full.
Coffee House, the Resistance.
It was full
The free
of
school.
people doing things and believing they could do things and not being reluctant about speaking out. Some of us were terribly unsophisticated about speaking out, but we did it anyway. I taught a course here at Women's Studies and Women's Studies called Lesbians in Contemporary Society, somewhere in there, and was excited that people came and wanted to know about lesbians in contemporary society. Audre Lorde, Barbara Smith, Pat Parker, Bell Hooks showed up fairly regularly on this campus and talked about things that they believed in. I had the privilege of meeting all of them and spending time with them. The Black Women's Rap Group started out with a group of black lesbians who didn't want to say the Black Lesbians Rap Group because we were scared. But we would meet and we would talk about our needs and how we fit into the larger lesbian and gay movement, where we were mostly uncomfortable most of the time. That kind of morphed into, because we wanted to expand ourselves, the Las Mujeres de Colores de Oregon. That is, we started working with some Latino. And that, we chose that name to elevate the idea of diversity, to elevate the idea of a multicultural approach to social justice. The rap group, incidentally, was the group that first brought Sweet Honey and the Rock to this town, Jefferson High School. Nobody here much had heard about them unless they'd heard about them from the East Coast, but we brought them here. Radical Women, socialist organization I joined. I was the organizer here in Oregon. We were everywhere. People thought there were 50 of us, there were 7. But we showed up, we made noise, sometimes not pleasant noises, which is eventually why I left both them and the Freedom Socialist Party. The problem with the left is it yells at people about things that people aren't interested in at the level at which they're being yelled at. And an inability to interact with other human beings on the level of, how are your kids? What's going on at your workplace? Or, come on, let's go have a cup of coffee. Why I joined up had to do a lot with the theory. Feminist leadership, people of color leadership, gay rights, lesbian rights, making a distinction between what women need and what men need. All of that appealed to me. All of that was exciting. And I found it really uplifting on paper. Living it out is a hard thing to do. Just like anything else, it's really hard to live your life so that you bring your behaviors in line with your beliefs. Walking your talk is a hard thing to do. I left them because I couldn't handle it anymore. Let's see, there was something else on here I wanted to say a little bit about. I told you about the International Women. The Fred Hampton Clinic, when the State Attorney General wanted the files on clients who had come to the clinic, and Senator Ford said no. And she meant no. What was wonderful to me is how people turned out to support that no. It filled up I remember going to a meeting at the Women's Center back here on Everett again. People were mailing stuff out, people were planning things, strategizing things, taking on responsibility, being involved, and standing behind her saying no. And that's when Lynn came in, we set up the Defense Committee that met separately, and it was a well-organized effort to resist the State Attorney General, and we won. even if there were differences on other levels between us and among us, we understood the importance of working on this issue together. I think that was true for a lot of what went on during that time. I think that hope and that belief that we could change things motivated us to struggle through some of the other, more bristly, more difficult issues. We're still struggling through a lot of them. But there was a willingness to sit down and talk about class and race and gender and sexual orientation that I don't know if it's still there. I don't see it anymore. I was also a part of the 1975 200-person gay pride march. 200 scared people. What was her name down there, the orange juice woman? Anita Brown.
Oh.
Was making, yeah, she's making noise all over the place. And we were marching, I guess it was maybe 4th or 5th Street. And I can remember people on the sidewalk that I knew were gay or lesbian who would not join in the march, but they would watch. And there were guys behind us with these huge banners that said, "Turn or burn." And they were walking those banners with us down to the waterfront. After about 3 or 4 years of those guys following us around, some of the men in our march grabbed those banners and tore them up and told them to get the hell out of the march. And we just all cheered. Those were times for me that were inspiring and invigorating. And I personally believe it's time for them to come back with a little different level of sophistication, a little more planfulness. I heard you mention the Occupy movement. I've heard about problems that are having not just to do with external violence, but internal violence. The issues of women. If you don't believe people don't like women, you have not been paying attention the last couple of years. Just it's spewing out of people. It's not even subtle. It's not even, let me open the door for you. It's like you don't even deserve to go through the door. Now, I don't like it that we're not making a whole lot of noise on a grassroots level. Institutions and organizations will make the noise they want up to the point of their funding or the point of them not having access. Or what. We're the ones that need to make the noise. Regardless if we have that, Now does good work. Planned Parenthood does good work. They do good things. We need more. But we need it not just about women's issues. We need it about all those things that the president listed in his speech that he cannot do without people backing him. They make the laws, we make the change. Because the laws don't make the change. We do. Thanks.
I want to add just a little bit of fill in perhaps in some things that I was involved in that you guys touched on a little. At the time, I had little kids, and I was a part-time student at PSU. But I was also a faculty wife, and I had gotten hold of, from an organization called, I've forgotten. It was a national radical organization of professors, and
New University.
thank you. And my faculty husband had gone to their conference, and he came back with literature. There was one of the first movies with nudity in it that wasn't an actual porn film was something. It was Swedish or it was Scandinavian, called "I'm Curious Yellow." And actually, it played a long time at the Aladdin Theater, and they made so much money on it, they did turn into a porn theater after that. But there was a pamphlet that came back from that New University conference called I Am Furious Female. And this was, of course, before there was Xerox, before there was email, of course. I excerpted. Huh? Yeah, how did it was much harder to organize. There was a woman in the anti-war movement who was a professional secretary, and I hired her to type up the mimeograph things of excerpts from this thing, and because I had access to faculty mail, I mailed it to all these faculty women. I couldn't afford the postage to send it, by real mail, but this was free. And I had a meeting, and all these women showed up. And that was the first that I know of consciousness raising kind of. And when we say consciousness raising, I mean the things that we didn't question. We didn't question that want ads were jobs for men and jobs for women, different columns. We didn't question that we were paid less for the same jobs, that we couldn't get the same jobs, that there was no daycare. I mean, just, it would take all night to talk about all the things that none of us had even thought, and that's why we needed consciousness raising. And these things which brought this need, this difference, this hey, pay attention to everybody's radar. And after that, we got a group going, 2 or 3, and then people kept asking, we want more, we want more. And I started working with Holly Hart, who is now, owns and runs Old Wives' Tale. That time, I think she was still a student at Reed. Holly, there was the New England Free Press. They put out all kinds of pamphlets, and Holly wrote away to the New England Free Press, and her trunk was a little bookstore. And so whenever she went, she could go out and get these pamphlets. And we even got the meeting room at the library one night, and dozens of women came that wanted to be in consciousness raising groups, and we set up these groups. And then I want to also comment on Maureen mentioned about the baby. The president would have a reception at the beginning of every faculty year for the faculty at his home. This very fancy, beautiful house. I think it was Lake Oswego or Riverdale, or it was very nice. And we brought our children. And some of the people who came were not even faculty. They were young women with babies. And when it goes so well with you changing the diaper on his desk, because one of the women sat down around the swimming pool and started nursing her baby. Mm-hmm. And you really didn't nurse in public then. I mean, I noticed on the way to the bathroom they have a locked lactation room here. I was kind of shocked. Just down the hall. I noticed that tonight. But, there was quite a long period when people demanded, this is a normal thing. We don't have to hide. But this was the first time, and that was the last time that the president had a faculty welcome party at his home. So I don't know do you want to have any between yourselves, or should we open it up to the audience now, or do you guys have questions?
I bet they do.
Do you have questions of each other first?
I think this issue of violence is, I had 2 comments sort of that were in my head. The first is, I agree that we were naive and we were the generation that believed we could do anything. It was heady, it was exciting. I think we were damn lucky. I feel sorry for kids today because they're more realistic, they're definitely more sophisticated. I know when I started in the neighborhood movement, it was a brand new thing, and the city didn't know how to handle this. So we got a whole lot of things that we wanted. But over time, of course, they hired consultants, they hired this, they hired that, and pretty soon, I mean, today, I think that the neighborhood movement in Portland is a shadow of what it once was and what it could have been. And I think the same thing happens now. The forces on the other side are much more sophisticated in knowing how to handle this. And it gets harder and harder to do fun, creative things that capture the hearts of people. And you know, I'm hoping that the technology that I sometimes curse is going to bring unified people together in another way that kind of goes around that. The other thing is the thing about violence. Me and the FBI are old friends, and they spend a lot of time following me around and harassing me and my family. And people that I knew robbed banks and blew up things because they felt upset about the war. And, you know, I have to say I don't have a philosophical opposition to the idea of violence. I understand if I was, you know, in some of these countries that I would be probably moved to it. But the fact is it doesn't fit the United States of America at this time in history. And what does happen is what was happening during that time, we all found out later, was the FBI was in there actually stirring it up. And they were actually entrapping people now. Does this sound like today's news? But I mean, it's really true, and they've gotten very sophisticated about it. And the fact is violence at this time, no matter how much you passionately feel about it, isn't it tactically smart? And it really just isn't the time or the place and how to do things. But there will always be people, and good people, who just get damn frustrated because progress is so slow. And it isn't until you look back, you know, 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, like we're doing now, you realize, god darn, what we did made a difference. And what kids are doing today are, I say kids, I mean obviously there's we're all still pretty involved, but you know, I think a lot of the water's being carried by the youth, and what they're doing today is going to change our world and is going to make it better, and it's just going to take a while to be able to see that and how that's going to happen.
Well, on the violence thing, it's a struggle I have, for sure. I consider myself essentially a nonviolent person. I do, however, own a gun. And I got that gun when my life was threatened. And I wasn't willing to just give my life over. I've never fired it. It may not even be loaded at this point. I have no idea. I know where it is because I have grandchildren. Big picture, are we just repeating what happened before if we continue down the road of violence? Bert Tillstrom, who's a puppeteer, Kukla Brand and Ollie did a wonderful demonstration by using a glove, black glove. And the glove went over, the fingers went over, tried on the glove. The glove becomes a Hitler-esque figure, oppressing other people. These people grab the glove, throw it down, get rid of this hand, and then they're curious about the glove, and they put it on. That's my concern. Can you get to a nonviolent world using violence, and how do you win? Because that's the issue there. How do you win? And maybe you can't win and stay alive. And the most the figures with the most historical cachet around nonviolence were killed. They were murdered. So the question is, are you prepared to die? But then that's the question in all of this. Mm-hmm. Are you prepared to die? So the question of violence becomes, under what circumstances are you prepared to die? So I go around and around. That's the conversation I have with myself quite a bit. Because I cannot envision myself deciding to go and do violence. but I also cannot envision myself allowing violence to be done to me without resistance.
Or someone,
Or
or someone weaker that needs protection.
I see there's a difference between being passive and being a pacifist. I think being a pacifist is a philosophy and a discipline you put yourself under to cope with a violent world, whether it's on a personal level or an institutional level. But at the same time, if you're passive, you are opening yourself up to be trashed, and nobody should do that. So there's that fine line between personal integrity and defending yourself and still having a certain kind of vision for the society you want to transform. As you said, if you become the glove, then the struggle has been lost.
So did I see your hand, Sarah?
Yeah, this is a little bit different direction, but each of you spoke in different ways about we and the sense of like the collective. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little more to the quality of and the role of relationships and friendships in starting, sustaining your movement work.
Well, I had when the FBI decided to go after me, I had sort of an interesting experience, and I think it goes to what Kathleen said. Kathleen, sorry. Don't have your name in front of me, so. I had been very active in the radical movement. I guess was sort of a quasi-natural leader in that in Portland. And when the FBI went after me, I had already gotten involved in the neighborhood movement and in my neighborhood, and went to the neighborhood meetings and sat on the neighborhood planning committee. And one of the people on the planning committee with me was John Bircher. So when the FBI started after me, an interesting thing happened, and that was that the radicals, with few exceptions, all ran away from me because they were scared. And my neighborhood had to put up with the FBI in a van outside my house and getting visited by the FBI. My neighbors got visited by the FBI asking questions about me. And I'm sitting in this planning committee meeting, and this John Bircher comes up to me and he says, I understand the FBI is watching you all the time. My wife and I talked about it, and we want you to move in with us. So that was an incredible, that was one of those life-changing experiences. And, somebody who speaks good, and the other thing, one of the people involved who later went to prison, Leslie, she was considered the hippy-dippy girl in this group of ex-cons who were blowing things up and robbing banks. Well, when, the whatchamacallit hit the fan, the one person who was steady on, who didn't start ratting out and squealing, was this hippy-dippy girl. So what I learned is that, until you're put to the test, you don't know how you're going to act. You don't. You don't fool yourselves. You do not know until you are confronted with that choice point what you're going to do. And I think once you understand that, you realize talk is cheap, and people who talk a good talk don't always walk the good walk. And you really aren't going to know, and you have to go beyond what they're telling you in their theory. You've got to go to their heart and their soul, and you have to be able to sit and have a cup of coffee and cherish them as human beings. And then I think you get a better idea of who's going to be standing next to you.
Echo. I don't enter into any activity or political effort assuming friendship. I assume goodwill, I assume personal integrity, I assume commitment, and then I wait to see if they happen. I don't see it as a love affair. I don't have to trust you before I'll trust you. That is, see you demonstrate something. You know, people want you to cry, and that tells them that you're real. No, I don't want you to cry. I want to see what you do. I want to see if you keep your word. I want to see if you carry through on what you said you're going to do. That means that sometime down the line, we may enter into what I consider a personal relationship, which is a friendship. Again, it's not a love affair. I'm going in here, we're going to take this building out, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to move the world. You don't even have to like me. I don't have to like you. I will grow to like you when you do the things you say you're going to do. I will grow to respect you and hope you will respect me when I do the things that I say I'm going to do. Because that's all that's relevant here. That we agree, we're going in this direction, and we're going to work toward that together. Because if I'm waiting to make a friendship before we move forward, we'll be sitting here till doomsday.
Sarah, is it? Yeah. I hear what Kathleen is saying. Kathleen?
Kathleen.
You said it right.
Take you home again, Kathleen.
You said it.
Next time,
And you
little
said
cards.
it too. It's a duality, right? You work with people, you learn who they are, and you come to respect and rely on them. And also, I think it's through personal relationships, friendships, that when you really share ideas, that you have, that the personal connection helps build the political connection. And I think that's one of the reasons, usually the most visible face of any movement for social change is usually its youth. And it's when you're young is when you have that time and intensity to really relate to other people. When you're at that stage in life, your friends are the most important things in the world usually to you. And I think it's a combination of that personal connection and through your convictions, finding people you can work with and then becoming friendly with them. And there's so many places we could go with this discussion. We could go into such a discussion of the history of the movement in general, which is obviously what you're working on, and I think is very important. But I guess I came to the women's movement and developed almost a Luxembourgian, would you say? Luxembourgian perspective. Rosa Luxemburg is one of my heroes. She was an incredible woman. And her point in the turn of the century Germany, she was a Pole, but she went to Germany so she could have more political freedom. She said very importantly that women have to not only develop their own movement, they have to develop themselves to lead the whole society, all the institutions. They have to be totally equal partners. And, that's still a work in progress, but that's always been my orientation. And it's what I would like to share with you, that as women, consciously developing our internal and external leadership is maybe our biggest job.
Oh, I want to add one more thing about friends. If your friends won't tell you the truth about how you're behaving and how you need to think and whether your behavior is in line with what you express as your intent in the world, they are not your friends. That's a special category for me. That's somebody who will say, Kathleen, you are now being a jerk. And then I'm going to pay attention. But if I don't have those people in my life, then I think I'm more likely to trip up, become more and more arrogant, mess up, ignore something and be basically a jerk at times and not have anybody call me to task for it. That's a really important part of a friendship, especially in political action for me.
I just wanted to say, you were asking about the we, and I think it was a time of, as Maureen said, our friendships were very important, but it was all, well, first of all, in the consciousness raising group, I don't think I've ever gotten so close with a group. So that those are lifelong friendships, really. And I kept trying to recreate that experience, and it wasn't possible to do it more than once. You know, the first time was, I actually refer to it as, you know, it's like losing your virginity. You know, there's nothing like the first time. And this was the first time in these consciousness raising groups, you know, and you can't do it again. But it was a more communal time. People were setting up, people were living in communes, and on the land, in houses, and we were, and as women, we were, it used to be the women would end up in the kitchen together because the men didn't want them. Well, we wanted to be in the kitchen together talking. And I also had men, friends later, tell me they were afraid to come over to my house because I was so angry. As consciousness, and I think that was, you know, all this anger came up for all these years of having been pushed down and not even understanding that one was being pushed down. So I don't know if we've answered your questions there, but, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
I guess, you know, my question is that it feels constantly like we're always playing a massive catch-up, and that the institutions that are in place are always 500 steps ahead of any movement that's really happening. So what I kind of struggle with is, do social movements really make broad change, or do they just seek to bring in a group of people into the existing structure, and then those people sort of neutralize and become a part of this system? And I guess my question is, do you think that any social movement, if it seeks to just exist within this current structure, can ever make the broad change that we're talking about, or will it just kind of fizzle out?
Well, if you're talking revolution, I think that in some cultures and situations today, I mean, that's happening. Are we in a place where that's going to happen? We're going to overthrow capitalism and institute, you know, a more just, what I would call economically just society. I don't think we're there. I think the problem is, for so long, we've kind of reaped the benefits of what we've done around the world. Obviously, those chickens are coming home to roost, and we are, you know, as planned by the Trilateral Commission in the 1960s. I read a paper in the late 1960s where the Trilateral Commission, which was a group of capitalists, met in Japan, and they plotted out the future of the United States, which included making education harder, higher education harder for people to get, included having a workforce that was beaten down because they would send the jobs away from the United States, and basically creating more of a gap. Brooke is nodding her head because I think she probably read the same thing that I did at the same time. But you know, all the things that they said they planned to do to us, they're doing. And I guess my perspective on it is, when I sat in Singapore and thought about living in Singapore with a very wonderful person, I decided to come back to the United States because I could see from that perspective that as we become more sophisticated in articulating and fighting for and visualizing a better world, the other side is fighting just as hard to keep that from happening. And it's a spiral, but it's an upward spiral, and it's hard to see that, and it's very daunting, and it's very depressing many days because you don't see it happening. And I guess that's where I think friends are important. Wonderful friends who think like you do and kind of keep your spirits up and reinforce the good values that you have. And people do get absorbed, but then there's people, we know them, who've never gotten absorbed. Ted Pyle is a great example. He just got out of jail because he doesn't believe in having a driver's license, and he doesn't have one. So, it's that kind of thing. It's not an easy question. It's one you're going to ask your whole life, I promise you.
Well, along those lines,
Kathleen or Maureen, did you
Yeah,
want to
I'm
respond?
I want to just, reform or revolution is the essence of the question that you're asking. And the question I've always had is, what would my revolution look like? We put ourselves in a position repeatedly of fighting against something, and very seldom do we say what we're for. Until we can get a cohesive, somewhat cohesive statement that is broad enough to say what we're for, I think we will always be in that position. I'm a Facebook junkie now, as best as I can manage. And I just wrote something that said we need a constitutional amendment that says we're all human, we're all in. The way our Constitution was written, the reason we're fighting our way in is because we were left out. And we have
Still
somehow...
left out.
And we, yes.
The Equal Rights
What
Amendment
happened to
never
the
passed.
ERA? Yeah,
It's
exactly. I was
never
thinking about that.
passed.
It's never passed.
Never.
And we're just kind of going, oh, well, wonder what happened to it.
It's not important.
Well, one of the things that also happened with that was women were so arrogant about the ERA. They thought, well, nobody will pay attention to that. We are going to win because we're right. And I saw those arguments presented, essentially, and we lost. Well, it's not in Oregon. But my point is that we are not thinking about as much about how to make it better as we should. We're thinking about how to defeat those people who are making bad. What do we want? Some people are saying if we want this, we want that. How does that fit into the big picture? What does the revolution look like? And I don't know that we've ever come to any kind of a sort of a agreement across the board as to what that would be.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I think, as I reflect back on the movement and all of these things that we were involved in, that it was, we were always reacting to something that was being done by what we called the establishment then. And even though there were these efforts by people to create institutions, women's health, daycare, all of those things, they're kind of little pieces of putting together the kind of world that we want to live in. But I find myself now working in the labor movement and feeling such a sense of despair, and particularly the news this week that organized labor has shrunk to the smallest number ever, and looking at the part-time faculty that I represent here at Portland State, and the unwillingness of those people who depend on the pay rate, the working conditions, the health fund, the professional development fund, all of those things that we negotiate, and they thank me, but nobody wants to step forward and play even the tiniest role in making sure that those things happen. I'm frankly at a loss to know how we create a common vision because I think that potential must exist. But it's so hard to get there today. It's hard. I think that we're all much more fragmented from one another than we were in the 1960s. We still had time to talk to friends.
Now we're on email.
And email is not the same thing.
not the
It's
same
not
thing.
the same,
I
but
agree.
it's still better
It's
than
good.
where we were 10 years ago, which we
Yeah.
didn't have anything.
So I'll just leave it at that. Anything else?
I
to
think
say?
people should be sitting in rooms talking to each other. I can't have a real good conversation on email. First of all, I can't interrupt. I want to take a look at history and sort of give an example of a failure to think about what we want. When Frederick Douglass attended the first Seneca Falls convention, women's convention, he sat on the stage with a shotgun because the women were being threatened. The women were being told they couldn't have the vote, and black people were being told, black men were being told they couldn't have the vote, and black women. Let's divide it up a little bit here.
Mhm.
What happened was black men were given the vote. Made a split in that alliance, immediate split between the people who were abolitionists and the people who were feminists, and oh my God, those people got the vote, you gave them the vote, and how dare you say that, and blah, 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 blah. Instead of saying, okay, one down, another one to go. We got the black men in, now let's get the women in. We divide ourselves. Nobody did that to us. Nobody tells us we can't work together. Or they can tell us that. If we believe it, then we can't do it. But if you really believe that you can live through whatever it takes to stay in the room, as what's her name, Sweet Honey in the Rock, Bernice Reagan used to say, if you're working in coalition and you don't feel like you're dying, you're not doing it right. Because you will feel like you're giving up something. But you are, but you're exchanging it for something else. And I think if we don't remember, if we don't get focused on what's positive, if we don't remember what happens when we get all worked up and separate off, as opposed to stay in the room, just stay in the room. And you can't do that on email. It's too easy to check out, not respond. I can send you a meeting notice.
Yes.
On the topic of kind of just checking out, as a younger person, I find that one of the most frustrating things is that my generation seems apathetic to matters of social conscience. I mean, we're aware that things are wrong, but no one seems willing to attend anything, volunteer for anything, organize anything. And I was just wondering, because I am a part of my generation, and I might just be a malcontent about my generation, as we in our 20s are want to do. What's your guys' general impression? Is apathy currently a problem? That this general idea that, oh, the women's movement is over, we don't have to fight for anything anymore, or is it not as much of a problem as I perceive it to be? Because I perceive it to be pretty much the number one issue that equal rights are facing right now, because while the younger generation generally holds the opinion that yes, prejudice is bad, yes, hatred against women is bad, no one really seems to be doing anything about it.
I think apathy's always been a problem. If, I wished I had $1 for every time that was the topic of conversation in the 70s. It was always a problem, and we had a big issue to a couple big issues to coalesce around that you don't have now. So
The draft.
the draft.
Self-interest.
The draft was a biggie. So I think apathy is always a problem. There's always somebody, I think it may have been Mousy Tongue said, the revolution's made by less than 10% of the people.
Exactly.
And, that's just the cold reality of it. And you got to get that tipping point where you all are consensing on something, and then all the rest will follow along, but it's up to you to step forward and do it.
I think it's dangerous though a little bit, because it seems when capitalism and the system that we're in, its plasticity is so all-encompassing. So you come with kind of a manifesto, what Kathleen was saying, you come with an idea of something structured, and before you know it, capitalism is, kind of slithered its way around it, and it's caused it to be transformed.
And they're making money off it.
And they're making money off it. And then, the Mike Moore and stuff will always talk, you drive a truck down this stuff, the exploiters exploit themselves. And I think in this plutocracy, and we are in an oligarchy here, that revolution has to just kind of happen. It can't really be premeditated. And I do agree with everything Kathleen has said, and I only just think that sometimes when you have this, this kind of manifesto that you've been working with and getting the collective, we're never going to agree collectively on anything. The Koji Shamba, they said no more, and they had to fight for it. Maureen, I think it's mixed madness, like Dr. Chomsky says it, and as we said at the University of Chicago, which is the constant paradox when I was an undergrad there, because here they produce something as bad as the Chicago boys, but yet they produce social revolutionary thought. And so I think what gets me is that we can't sit and think about how everyone to get along. We have to knock it down, a needle drive innovation. And at that point, then we can actually see what's going on. But I don't think the people in Tahrir Square were saying, we need to have this generalized, massive canopy of a thought. I think it's just like we have to perform revolution. I think that in this system that we have, this passive-aggressive stuff, okay, it will get some things, but again, it kind of has to be what Kathleen was saying a little bit, where there has to be a threat, there has to be some kind of threat. Otherwise, it really is, it's the dog without teeth, and the paper tiger doesn't go anywhere, and that's kind of my thought about this. And our generation, yes, we're apathetic, but that's systemic. We've been forced to be that way. This is part of the grand model. I mean, whenever you see it, anyone who studied even Roman history knows that this is kind of part of the deal, of the late staging, or what Marx says, the dying kind of embers of the corrupted capitalism. And I get tired of it because Alice and I both, I mean, when the CIA came to recruit at the University of Chicago, I was the only one. I agree with Kathleen. Friendship does not really matter because you never know who, like you said, who your friends are, really. And so when we said, we're going to protest these recruiters from the CIA coming here, I don't want the corporate interest assassins at my campus, right? Me and this other kid are the only ones. And so now maybe they have a dossier about me and stuff like that, or whatever, but friends are irrelevant in this system. And I just feel like the bread and circus is just still a little too much. We're not seeing the embers of revolution because we're still satiated. And we have to feel some pain. We have to feel like your water rights are being taken.
They are.
Else,
They are.
We have to start feeling pain until we don't.
You don't
feel
think
that
this
pain.
recession is knocking your generation on its ass?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's beginning. It's beginning
It's
because
happening.
as we lose the middle class and that comfort zone, and I mean and I think I'm quoting Mao again. And believe me, I didn't sit around in little rooms and talk Mao Zedong, but I did like the Red Book. But what he said is that the revolution does not come from the lumpen proletariat. It comes from the disappointed expectations. And that's what we are finally getting to that place in the United States, where your generation certainly doesn't have the hopes and the expectations being realized that my generation did. And so one of the things I write historical mysteries. My guy's a labor movement spy. He's in Portland in 1902. The reason I
Against the railroads, right?
yeah, against
he's great.
railroads and timber barons, he's against all that. But the thing is that the reason why I picked 1902 is because the progressives were back then, and they were like we were. We can change the world, and they did. But the same thing happened to them. The other side got more sophisticated in dealing with them. And what was happening back then was the consolidation of wealth and the consolidation of power in the United States. And it was happening all across the world, but it was, you know, in the United States, that's where it was, what was happening here. What's happening now is the same thing, only now it's worldwide.
Yes.
Consolidation of power and consolidation of wealth. We are fighting the same battle, only it's on a world scale. I see hope in that. And the reason I see hope in that is because as one world we are seeing now that we are all one people, and we are developing a worldwide view of ethics and values
Yes.
that this we've never had as
Yes.
humanity.
Yeah.
That is where the hope is, and that's what you're a part of. And but it's hard. You are one little soldier fighting a battle that
Do you
seems
think, though, what
hopeless.
the Slavoj Zizek says about this kind of thing is that we should get out of its way and let the pain kind of build? Because the more we stand in the way, the more, you know, we're going to kind of, I mean, the satiation point might cause us, so we should almost maybe escalate. So the pendulum, so this proverbial pendulum that when we suffer, then we rise to the occasion. So
But you have to have, Kathleen's right, you've got to be putting forth the vision. Because as you communicate the vision of a better world, then as it gets worse, because you can't stop it from getting worse, that's the way it's moving, then you'll have something to put in its place.
There will come a point where you can intercede, where you can make a difference. I think there are a couple of things I want to address. First of all, I'm not forced into anything. Once I'm educated about an issue, I am not forced to be complacent or compliant or passive about it. I can choose it. And I recognize when I am choosing not to get involved. And until we give up that idea that we are the puppets, then we don't have any strength. All we got to do is react. The issues for me are courage and leadership. And if you think you can change the world and not get shot at, or not get hurt, or not lose your job, or not lose your friends, then you're missing the boat. You're talking about changing something that is there to keep you in your place. You get killed doing that stuff at the extreme. We're old enough to have seen a lot of people killed around the issues of, especially race in the 60s. You know, Merle Evers was the person who did the invocation at the inaugural. Well, it's her husband that was killed. He was murdered. He's just one of many. But you can decide not to be forced into silence, because you're not. You're forced to make a choice between whether you're going to let them come and get you while you're hiding in the closet, or whether you're going to go outside and say, come and get me some of it. I garbled the last part. Come and get me. I'm ready to stand up, and I'm going to be who I am, and here are my comrades, here are my friends. They're going to stand with me. Some of them will leave you, some of them will stay. That fear of dying keeps you dead. It keeps you unwilling to participate in your own liberation, your own life. And I don't know any way you can do change, social justice work, without stepping out. I don't know how you can do it in secret.
You have to develop a thick skin.
You just know you might die.
Well, yes, but even before that point, there's a lot of abuse in standing up
Yes,
against,
there
you
is.
know,
Yeah.
putting yourself out there. You just, it's not for everyone. It's the 10% seems like a lot, actually, to get involved.
One thing I would say, though, is that if you're a soldier or a warrior in this lifelong battle, you need to pace yourself. And if I had anything I would do over again, I would have been a little more balanced. I would have had, now I discovered I like to write fiction, I like to do carpentry, and I like to play music, and I love my friends. And that's all I've come to that a little later than I wished I had, because I think if you have a more balanced life and you take care of your soul in this, you do a better job being a soldier and a warrior. And you do a better job of strategizing on how to reach the hearts of other people.
And you're a better model for people that you want to attract to what your cause is.
That's probably true.
And I think, kind of dovetailing on everything, and I come from the unfortunate generation of X, where I was an observer and admirer of your generation and oh wow, of the millennials. And so, but I think that, especially with the millennial generation, this whole concept of global community, we're global, you know, and it's such an illusion, and I think it's overwhelming, you know, that we can, you know, Facebook or whatever around the world and see what's going on around the world and really be overwhelmed by all the problems of the world, when really, especially in you all are examples, it just starts locally in your community is where it all starts.
Right.
If we can multiply, you know, 1 million of people just focusing on their little communities, and that's where we all need to start. That you look through history, you know, throughout history, the movements all started with, you know, William Lloyd Garrison making the printing press for 40 years, a liberator, or Jane Addams working in Chicago with that little neighborhood, or Francis Perkins in New York, or all the many other ones. And it just starts in the community, and I think that there's a whole discourse and a whole issue that we really need to address with getting back to really being involved and understanding and being aware of our communities, and just, you know, just kind of maybe packing that big parachute up and just, you know, putting down stakes and looking around in your neighborhoods and reading your printed newspapers.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you especially to our wonderful panel.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Stan.